Welcome to today's webinar, Serious Injury and Fatality Prevention, a View from the Top. During today's presentation, attendees will be in a listen-only mode. If during the program you would like to submit a question, please use the chat pod located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Type your question in the box at the bottom and click Send. If you have any technical difficulties, you may contact the help desk at 877-297-2901. Once again, that number is 877-297-2901. Now I'm going to turn it over to Magali Flores. Magali, please go ahead.
Thank you for that introduction, Shalane. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Campbell Institute webinar, Serious Injury and Fatality Prevention, A View from the Top. Today we will be broadcasting the recording of the 2017 Executive Forum, originally recorded last September at the NSC Congress and Expo in Indianapolis, Indiana. During this presentation, you will hear from senior operations and EHS leaders as they share their personal stories and strategic insights. The question and answer session from the original presentation will also be included at the end. I encourage you to stick around for that. With that, I hope you enjoy the presentation, and let's get started.
Your moderator this morning is the Director, Strategic Relationships at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, WSPS, in Toronto, Ontario. Responsibilities in this position include the leadership, growth, and ongoing management of WSPS strategic relationships. These relationships include business partners, alliances, volunteer partners, and key customer accounts. This role focuses on the ability to expand WSPS's reach in enhancing prevention outcomes in Ontario's health and safety system through the effective identification and management of its strategic relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, Larry Masadi.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to moderate today's session because I represent two of Campbell's global partners this morning. The first, as you heard, is my employer, Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, where we serve 165,000 businesses in the country and in the province of Ontario. But the second is Minerva Canada, where I serve as a volunteer secretary-treasurer, where the aim is to integrate health and safety into colleges and universities. And some of my colleagues will remember that Minerva began in the United States under the title Project Minerva. And Project Minerva was funded by NIOSH. So I'm proud to represent those two Campbell partners. The third piece I make note of, last night, for those that had the privilege of attending the dinner, the Campbell Institute dinner, we heard many of the speakers speak about the continuous journey that those of us in safety, health, and environment are on. And we at WSPS are on a similar journey. Through the guidance of the Campbell Institute and our colleagues at Campbell, we've done some things up in Canada that I think warrant mentioning quickly. One of them is we've created a CEO Health Plus Safety Leadership Network where we aspire to do many of the things that are happening here today. So many of your companies deal with businesses in Canada, so it's a good thing for you to know. The second piece that grew out of that initiative is Canada's Health and Safety Best Culture Award. So we try to honor that company or that organization that's got a great health and safety culture. The reason I mention that, I was on the east coast of Canada a year ago, and I was an assessor, as I am at Campbell Institute. I was interviewing the CEO, much like these ladies and gentlemen with me, and after an hour, the CEO said to me, "Larry, I've been listening to you ask me questions, and I'm trying to figure out, where are you from? Sometimes you sound American, sometimes you sound French, sometimes you sound Italian." And I said to him, this is the hybrid you get when you grow up on the Canadian side of the Detroit River. All right? So, by way of introduction, I also want to say, I know we've covered housekeeping, but in speaking to my colleagues at the back of the stage, we've decided that if technology lets us down, we are going to do a sing and dance because they have the capability of doing auto-tune. Laura will do the lead, and we will be the backup singers, Don and I. So, moving on, it is my privilege to invite up our first speaker, and the intent will be we will hold questions until the very end. Each person will speak and present on their take, their perspective on SIF. Our first speaker, Don Martin, is a 39-year career EH&S professional. He's currently a Senior Vice President responsible for leading DECRA BST, Organizational Safety America's consulting operations. Don's an expert in the elimination of fatalities, injuries, and catastrophic incidents. He's a frequent keynote and symposium speaker on this subject, and he's authored numerous published peer-reviewed papers, which I have studied in preparation for today. So I'm going to ask the tough questions. He leads numerous client SIF projects, directs DECRA BST's industry-specific study groups, and he's focused on the prevention of serious injuries and fatalities in many of the risk-intensive industry sectors throughout the world. Please welcome Don to the podium.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you today. And thank all of you, too, for your dedication to protecting the safety of others. We have a very noble profession. What could be more important than protecting the lives of our colleagues in our workplaces? This is what motivates us to do research in safety. It's what calls us to be better leaders in safety. And it's what drives us to get out on the floor at the working interface with our frontline workers to see things from their perspective. The prevention of serious injuries and fatalities is the single most important thing that we do. And if you look at the current state of where we are in safety and fatality prevention, I think you'll agree that we have a lot of work ahead of us. This graph that I show is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The black line represents 22 or 23 years of continuous improvement in recordable injury rate. And if you look at the red line demonstrates the rate of improvement in fatalities in our workplaces. The slopes of those two lines are very different, and that should be very concerning to all of us. As a matter of fact, when we saw those lines converging near 2010, it prompted us to launch a significant research project into understanding the causes and prevention of fatalities. And it has been one of the highlights of my career to have been involved in that research project, because we have in fact learned a lot about what causes fatalities and what we can be doing as organizations and leaders and safety professionals to interrupt this very disturbing trend. Now, buried inside that trend of fatalities not really improving as much as they should are two other trends that are very disturbing to me. One of those trends is around fatalities related to motor vehicle incidents over the road. VLS data shows us that 26% of all of our workplace fatalities are connected to over-the-road motor vehicle incidents. That is by far the #1 leading cause of workplace fatalities. We owe it to our workers and our employees to do something about that. The second disturbing trend is around contractor safety. And again, looking at BLS data, it shows us that since the BLS started collecting this data in 2011, the number of contractor fatalities has increased every single year. And the percentage of fatalities related to contractors has grown as a percentage of the total fatality picture. This also is something that we as leaders and safety professionals must take into account and must take steps to start addressing. When we conducted our research project, there were a number of significant findings that came out of that. The first one is the discovery of what we call the triangle within the triangle. And that is, there are a certain percentage of events that happen in our workplaces that have the potential to be serious injuries and fatalities. Now, definitions are important, so our definition of serious includes two major factors. Serious includes life-altering or life-threatening. Our definition of serious for the purposes of SIF research is different than other standard definitions of serious. So in other words, just because a worker suffered a broken bone or they had stitches or a cut that required stitches does not automatically make it SIF in the prevention of SIF research. For example, when we did our study, we had 7 global organizations provide us almost 17,000 case histories of events that covered a 2-year period and also covered over 1 million workers around the world. As we studied those case narratives, what we discovered was this. We would read a case narrative and we would see that a worker received a cut on a finger that required 3 or 4 stitches. And when you read the case narrative, what it showed was that the worker was using a knife, opening up a box, and they cut their finger and had to get stitches. And then you would also read a case with the exact same outcome. A worker who cut his finger had to get 3 or 4 stitches, and it goes on the OSHA recordable log as a medical case. But when you read the context or read the narrative of that situation, what happened to that second worker was that he was working on an auger, and the auger jammed. And he put his hand inside the auger to unjam it without enabling lockout, tag-out control of hazardous energy. And as he removed the jam, the auger restarted, and just in the nick of time, he pulled his hand out of the auger, and he ended up with a cut on his finger that required stitches. Now, if you think about those 2 cases, the outcome is exactly the same. But the context of their exposure situation is dramatically different. The second case has what we call SIF exposure potential. That worker could have had his entire hand amputated and suffered life-altering or life-threatening consequences. So as we were looking at these 16,000 to 17,000 cases, it turned out that that case I described with the auger, cases like that represented 21% of everything that we looked at. And so the big paradigm shift for me was starting to look at the accident triangle or the accident pyramid in a different way. That when you realize that about 20% of everything that gets reported has the potential to be SIF, and that is realistic, reasonable potential, that if one thing had changed, the outcome would have been completely and totally different. That created a big shift for me as a safety professional to start thinking about things differently. When I graduated from college and started in the safety professional, I mentored under some of the best safety professionals in the world, and one of the things they taught me was if I could shrink the bottom of the pyramid, the top would take care of itself. So I probably spent 2 decades of my career working on the bottom of the pyramid, while at the same time I kept experiencing those every once in a while fatal events and those every once in a while life-altering events, and I didn't understand why that was happening. now I get it. Now I understand that I've got to have an intentional focus on the triangle inside the triangle, and that's what many of you organizations are doing today, is that you have a focus on the triangle inside the triangle, and that's what will take care of the fatalities and life-altering events that happen at the top. Now for a safety moment. Why is this important? Why is it important that we focus on what makes a difference? Here's my safety moment for the day. This morning, I was in an elevator in my hotel, going up to the top, and I was inside the car, and at the last minute when the door was closing, I saw an arm stick into the elevator car. And there were two workers, two guys that I know, who were trying to stop the elevator so they could open the door to get into the car. Now, I see that, and my heart starts to pound because I do a lot of work in fatality prevention in the elevator sector. And one of the things that they have taught me is never trust those electric eyes in the elevator doors. They say the buttons are there for a reason, push the buttons. Those doors are known to fail, and the car can go up or down, and we have numerous documented instances of arms or other body parts being severed because of that. So that's your safety moment for the day. Take that back before you get on an elevator, and when you get in the car, if somebody needs to open the door at the last minute, please push the button. Now for a few headline SIF research findings. As we were doing our research, and we have borne this out, we have worked with in excess of over 100 different clients, and these numbers still hold true today. About 20% of everything that gets reported has SIF, and I'll tell you that about 90% of the time, that number that we calculate is 20% plus or minus 2 percentage points. It's remarkable how frequently that 20% comes up. The other thing that we find, and I'm going to combine both of these top two headlines into one, that in 71% of the fatal accidents that we looked at, there was either a breakdown in a life-saving safety rule, and sometimes we'll call them life-critical standards, but there was a breakdown in that, or a breakdown in a pre-task risk assessment or job safety brief. So combined, 71% of the fatalities that we looked at had breakdowns in one of those two areas. So if you're looking to get a head start on preventing SIFs, those are two outstanding places to start your journey. On the life-saving safety rules, the thing to look at is design integrity, and that is, does the rule itself, does it actually protect people? And then the other thing is behavioral reliability. The way that process is designed and the systems that support it, does it actually enable the behaviors reliably that you want to see to protect people? And then on pre-task risk assessments, it's important to look at the entire life cycle of the pre-task assessment in terms of, does it accurately predict the SIF exposures that a worker might be exposed to in the course of that job? Does it accurately identify the triggers that would cause a worker to stop the job? And does it in fact do a debrief at the end of the job to ascertain whether all aspects of the SIF exposures were properly controlled? The other big finding from our client work is that the accident case narrative is critically important. So again, when we did our research, we spent a lot of time looking at independent and dependent variables that were connected to the causation of fatalities. What we found, though, was the most beneficial part of the accident reporting process was the accident case narrative. The accident case narrative itself provides a very vivid and personal description of what actually happened. And when those case narratives are written very well, it is very easy for any person of any stage to look at that narrative and quickly determine whether SIF potential exposure existed in that event or not. And this is important because in order to attack SIF exposure, you have to look at the cases that have potential. Luckily, there are very few actual SIFs that happen in our workplaces. But I can tell you, if you have 1,000 injury reports or accident reports in the course of a year or two, and if 20% of them have SIF potential, you have 200 cases to study to extract these things that we call SIF precursors. That is a gold mine of information that can take you down the path for prevention. Now, many of our clients and other organizations that have spent a lot of time working on SIF and have demonstrated results in preventing SIFs and reducing SIF exposure have one big thing in common. They have executive level interest in this problem. So executives at the highest level in the organization take the time to understand SIF and understand what the precursors are in their organization. In other words, when they start looking through the lens of SIF exposure potential, it changes everything for that executive and for that organization. It changes how they start meetings. So instead of talking about lagging indicators like recordable injury rates, they start asking questions about events that have SIF exposure potential. And they want to know what they need to do as a senior executive to help get ahead of that curve. Many of these executives, because they focus on SIF potential, they find themselves spending more time in the field interacting with frontline workers, trying to understand what they're up against so that they can understand their executive responsibilities for protecting them. They also get more involved in understanding the hierarchy of controls in safety. They start looking at corrective and preventive actions that come out of SIF potential investigations, and they start asking really hard questions about why are we relying on lower level controls that require human beings to do things rather than focusing on the top part of the hierarchy in addressing prevention through design or inherently safer design. When these executives start asking questions about the hierarchy of controls, I guarantee you things happen. There's an old saying in the business world that says, what interests my boss simply fascinates me. And that plays out big time in industry when executives start to ask questions about hierarchy of controls. Now, as we have moved forward in preventing SIFs, what we have noticed is that there are 9 interventions that really matter. Organizations that are making big progress in reducing SIF exposure, mitigating the exposure, and eliminating SIF events have something going in every single one of these 9 areas. During the course of the next several days, you'll be hearing more about what these interventions look like. But the bottom line here is this. Every one of these interventions is not a standalone intervention. All 9 of these interventions interconnect with each other, and they require the other one to exist and perform at a high level for the other ones to work. Every one of these involves human beings. When we look at life-saving rules and improve how they are designed, we have to get out in the field to verify that they're performing as intended. We have to do pre-task risk assessments that reinforce the need to follow these rules. And we have to encourage workers to pause work and report near misses if they find that the control measures are not where they should be. And you'll hear Laura at Dow, you'll hear her talk more about that as part of Dow's journey. And again, every one of these interventions requires a human being to do something. So the last box on the far right-hand corner, understanding human behavior, is an important prerequisite for everything in SIF prevention to work. What we have found is that executives must spend time understanding the real reasons why people do what they do. It is a combination of behavioral science and neuroscience. And executives who take the time to understand why people do what they do makes a big difference in preventing SIFs. And you'll hear more from Peter at Lilly about this topic. Now, one of the last big things that successful organizations around SIF prevention are doing is they have identified SIF metrics that are very important to that organization. These metrics are important because they signal that executives are highly interested in preventing SIFs. And it also signals what they're interested in. And they in turn drive important, critical, desirable behaviors throughout the organization. For example, if I started to count the number of near misses that have SIF exposure potential, and I publicize that in some type of a metric, I would be encouraging people to report them when they see them. And if I design a system that is reprisal free and encourages people to report near misses and supports them when they do, that metric can drive a lot of highly desirable behaviors in the organization. If I have a metric around measuring the hierarchy of controls, or in other words, as an executive, I want to know how many of if I have an SIF investigation, did I have at least one corrective and preventive action that was in the top part of the hierarchy? And if I track something as simple as that, I can drive a lot of very important, meaningful behaviors elsewhere in my organization. So the role of metrics in SIF is very important, and it's really great to be working with organizations who are interested in this and taking a great role in developing these metrics further so that we can all use them. The last big thing is what else is out there? What else could be happening that we need to be on the lookout for that will make a big difference in preventing SIFs? Well, the first big thing that I see is we're coming up with better approaches for improving human reliability. And what we mean by that, I said it a minute ago, that there's a big combination between neuroscience and behavioral science, and we have to understand how the brain works. How does the brain affect decision-making in the moment, in the field, when you're facing an exposure? There's a lot of science behind this, and it's very important for us to pay attention to this. The other big area that's on the horizon being developed is developing the ability to recognize weak signals as they are occurring in the workplace in real time that lead to normalization of deviation. One of the unfortunate facts of investigating fatalities is that we almost always discover the presence of normalization of deviation. The question becomes, what leads to that? What are the weak signals out there in the field that are discoverable if we spend time in the field looking for them? And one of the ones that we've found is when a worker acknowledges or states that there is no procedure that governs the work that they're doing. And then they feel like they're in a position to do a field improvisation. So if a worker believes or senses that there's no procedure to guide them, and they make something up in the field that seems to work, and everybody gloms onto that, then you have a problem. Because now there may in fact be a procedure out there that's just not being followed, and this new norm gets developed, and that leads to exposure. Another one is around granting of variances. When a lot of people think that they have the authority to grant variances to procedures, we have a problem. So when you see these are weak signals and they're out there, and when we see them for what they really are, they're precursors to normalization of deviation. A lot of work being done in this area, and I think it will be bearing fruit very soon for helping us prevent SIFs. So that concludes my prepared remarks. I want to thank all of you for listening, and most importantly, I want to thank you for taking the time to care about the safety of others. I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.
I have to watch my behavior around elevators all of a sudden. There are people watching. Just a health and safety moment from my perspective. If anyone is finding it uncomfortably cold in this room, please come and join us on stage under the hot lights. Our next speaker, and again, I encourage you to reflect on what Dawn said and think of questions you'll want to ask at the end of the session. When I met Laura via teleconference a few weeks ago, I said, what should I know about Dow and the work that you do? She recommended I read the sustainability report, the 2016 Dow report, and I called her bluff and I read it. And I would recommend it to anyone because it is just an exemplary document around health, safety, environment, sustainability. It is exceptional. So, introducing Laura as our next speaker. Ambrose is currently Global Director of Environmental, Health and Safety Operations. She's a member of the Operations Leadership Team for the Dow Chemical Company. In her role, she's responsible for directing EH&S operations across the company, which includes 188 manufacturing sites in 36 countries. She serves on the steering committee and the advisory committee of the National Safety Council's Campbell Institute, and she has a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Iowa State University. Laura, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How is everybody? Awesome, great. I'm here to talk about Dow's bold approach to severe injury prevention. And before I get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about Dow. I think some of you might know us. We were about a 120-year-old company. We were founded in 1987, and safety has really been part of the DNA of our company for all those years. Herbert H. Dow, our founder, was one of the first people to design and require personal protective equipment for the chemical operations he was responsible for. We're a very big company. We have about 6,000 products manufactured in over 200 sites, and as Larry mentioned, in more than 35 countries around the world. And it takes all of us to keep safety in the forefront of everybody's mind. Our Dow family includes 53,000 employees worldwide, plus 50,000 contractors. And we rely on all of them to carry the safety banner every day. We hold ourselves accountable for our Dow employees and also our contractors, our seasonal employees, and our temporary employees. Like many of you, and like the statistics that Dawn showed this morning, we have been working on our injury and illness rate for several decades. We've done this with both the top-down and bottom-up improvement process, but also we believe that by working on the bottom of the pyramid, we would improve the injuries at the top of the pyramid, and we did not find that to be true. What we found is that while our injury and illness rate decreased over the decades, our fatality count and our fatality rate was basically flat. We had a 90% decrease in our injury and illness rate, but we really needed a new strategy because we couldn't halt the loss of our employees. So in 2015, we coined a new brand in line with the SIF program, and it was called our Save a Life program, or our Save a Life campaign. We use LIFE as our acronym for SIF. LIFE stands for life-altering injury or fatality event, and it really changed the culture of the company to look at those things that had the potential to be the most severe. For our fatalities, or for life events, the kinds of things that we were counting as a life event would be a fatality, but also an amputation, multiple fractures, blindness or spinal column injuries, anything that was permanently life-altering event. And then potential life events, or P-lives as we call them, are injuries or potential incidents that would cause one of those events. We really had to change our emphasis to saving lives versus counting metrics. So our leaders had goals every year on an injury and illness rate reduction. Now we had to talk about having goals on saving lives. We also had to get people comfortable with understanding potential versus actual. So people have to look forward and project forward the things that could happen, not things that did happen in the past. And then, of course, we had to start with our leaders supporting the shift. When you think about your own near-miss reporting systems, we had to learn also about our own near-miss reporting systems and how those near-miss reporting actually saves lives. So I'd ask you a couple questions. Does your near-miss reporting database include behaviors or just unsafe conditions? We found in our near-miss reporting databases that it was a lot easier to report a hose that wasn't rolled up or a ladder that wasn't hung properly on the ladder racks. And that was easier to record than a behavior. Does your near-miss recording, near-miss database include behaviors or self-reporting? So what we found is that our employees, our Dow employees, were much more likely to observe the behavior of a contractor than it was a behavior of their own employees, Dow employees. And then it was very unlikely to have a self-reported behavior near miss. And then if you want self-reported behavior near misses, you have to ask yourselves, what will my leaders do when they get the first reported self-behavior near miss? If they punish folks, then they're not likely to get many more near miss reports in the future. And we really had to change our expectations around this. We guided our leaders to say if somebody self-reports a behavior, then they have amnesty from any consequences. But if they're not self-reported, and then it relies on our traditional behavior management system. We thought everything was going great. We were really excited that this new program would save lives. And then 2016 happened. 2016 was a very difficult year for us. We suffered 4 fatalities, 3 of which occurred in a 2-week time period. 4 contractors and employees were not going to return home to their families. And so we decided, what are we going to do? We were really in shock. We did what most of you would do. We did a root cause investigation on these fatalities, but instead of doing it individually on the fatalities, we looked over fatalities over the past decade, and we looked for common trends on what was causing these severe incidents to happen. We found 4 things. They were happening on nights, they were happening on weekends, they were happening when employees were working alone, and they were happening to our most experienced operators. It was really a culture shock. It was an indicator that our culture on days was not the same as our culture on nights. And I know all of us want employees to behave the same way they do when someone's watching than when someone isn't watching. So it was really a wake-up call for us, and we really needed to take action. When you're talking about culture change, you have to start at the top of the company. And our CEO hosted a worldwide mandated stand-down and asked everyone to join him in a new quest for our severe incident reduction. What we did is he mandated that our top 200 leaders visit facilities around the world and walk in the shoes of the operations and maintenance personnel and have a conversation with them about what we were missing and what we could learn from them. I want to make sure you understand this is not just operations leaders, this is the top 200 executives of the company. This was financial executives, this was marketing managers, this was business directors, it was insurance agents, it was our top 20 executives. We sent a financial executive to rural Brazil, which included a 4-hour drive on a dirt road. He got to wear his blues, we call them, our Nomex suits, and walk in the shoes of the operators. And it was really eye-opening, both for the operators and for the employees. It opened up a new conversation between them. It allowed employees to share some of the workarounds they were having to deal with, and it opened the eyes of our executives to spend new money on EH&S that they might have otherwise not considered. It reminded our leaders that we're a very asset-based and people-based company. And although this won't bring our 4 employees back, it will certainly start a new engagement between our leaders and our employees. It was really so successful that we've decided to do it again every year. And so this year, everyone is revisiting sites. Now, to just tell you, each of the leaders were not able to go to anything they were familiar with, not their business, not their function, not their geography. And so it was really a fresh set of eyes for everyone and a new engagement. It was fabulous. So that was a start, but it wasn't the end. We also took a look at what we called windshield thinking versus rear view mirror thinking. And I challenged everyone in the organization, do you drive better looking out of the windshield, or do you drive better looking out of the rear view mirrors? And it sounds kind of silly, but certainly rear view or windshield thinking is what I challenged them with. Even the potential life events that we had been tracking as near misses were events that happened in the past. And we wanted more leading indicators that would help us know where the risk was for severe incidents. To help us pick leading indicators that would help us with risk, we turned to a story from 1969 about broken windows. Now, some of you may have heard the broken window story before, the broken window theory. It's been applied in a number of different scenarios, some that have worked and some that have not, but we used it to help us guide our leading indicators. If you haven't heard the broken window story, the story goes like this. There was a Stanford psychologist in 1969 that did an experiment where he parked a very nice car with no license plates and the hood up in a very disheveled neighborhood. It was low income, fraught with crime, and he parked this car in that neighborhood. He also parked the same car with the license plates off, the hood up, in a very pristine neighborhood in California with manicured lawns, flower beds, very nice neighborhood. The experiment was trying to decide if the environment would drive the behaviors within the environment. What he found was that the car parked in the low-income neighborhood had the radiator and the battery removed within minutes. The car was stripped of everything of value within 24 hours. The upholstery was ripped, the windows were broken, and children were using the car as a playground. The car in California sat untouched for more than a week. The question on this, on how it relates to leading indicators, is can we understand disorder and chaos in our own facilities and see if that environment would predict behaviors within the environment. When we tried to translate that into Dow, we had to take a long, hard look and swallow hard because we were doing many, many things and many priorities at one time. We were starting up Sadara. Sadara had 26 world-scale plants that were starting all up at the same time in Saudi Arabia. We were managing a more than $6 billion investment in Texas and Louisiana. And there's this small thing going on called the Dow-DuPont merger. But we thought, well, okay, if that's a measure of stress in the organization, can we really predict that a plant starting up in Saudi Arabia or a corporate merger would cause a fatality in Turkey? Well, we weren't sure that connection was so strong. We wanted to come up with what could be leading indicators closer to the plant level. So we looked to the plant level for measures of disorder to help us find out. If we translate the broken window into our plant facilities, we might think of disorder or things like emergency jobs, overtime, maybe unfilled jobs or open roles, fatigue, morale, measures of the environment that might predict behaviors within the environment. We thought that if we could find hotspots where plants were struggling with a number of these things, maybe struggling with overtime, but also starting a turnaround, or also had capital investment where we were putting too much stress on an organization, we could help move resources to where the hotspots were or help change their priorities or agenda. So let me ask you, which neighborhood is your facility in? As we continue on our path forward at Dow, we don't have all the answers. We're still learning ourselves. We do think there's a couple things that are critical if you're working on severe injury prevention. That is, you have to focus on potential. Folks have to understand that if one different thing happened, what could have been the difference in the outcome. We need to simplify to severe. It was a big deal for us to say, let's stop tracking hoses rolled and ladders not hung. Let's stop tracking that. Let's only track our life-critical standards and where our behaviors are not in line with our most life-critical work. We want to continue to reconnect our executives with our front line. We want to look at these new indicators that evaluate, new leading indicators that evaluate risk and maybe measure the environment. And then we want to hold ourselves accountable by continuing to be transparent both publicly and internally in events like this. That helps us learn and helps us grow. So this is the journey that we're on at Dow. Thank you.
So again, take a moment to reflect on some questions you're going to ask Laura, because she won't be able to handle the ones I'm going to pose, I think, right? I'd look to bring up Peter next, and we almost had a workplace violence incident in the back because we started talking about soccer, or we call that American football? No. By way of introduction, Mr. Peter Waite is currently serving as Senior Director for the Global Health, Safety and Environmental Group at Eli Lilly and Company. He's originally from Newcastle, England, where he received his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. Peter joined Eli Lilly and Company in 1987, and he's held a variety of leadership roles in operations, quality, and supply chain in the United Kingdom and the United States. He's a proud father of 3 children, and as I mentioned already, an avid soccer enthusiast. Peter.
Thanks for that. Good morning. As I was sitting at the table there, I thought I'm going to need to save some water for my presentation, and unfortunately I've drunk it all, so hopefully I don't run out of steam here. So again, good morning. I'm Peter Waite, Senior Director for Global HSE in Eli Lilly and Company, and I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about our company. Eli Lilly and Company's global headquarters is just a stone's throw from here. Many of you who've come in from outside will have seen the corporate headquarters. You might have wondered who we are. We are a pharmaceutical company. Let me get this up. We're a pharmaceutical company who make medicines to give people healthier, longer-lasting lives. It's a very noble mission, and we've put a lot of work into this over many years. The company was founded more than 140 years ago in a small laboratory by Colonel Eli Lilly, just as I say, a stone's throw from here. We've got about 41,000 employees globally, with a lot of effort in research and development. So we do put a lot of our employees' work in that area, 8,000 employees supporting development of new medicines. A couple of other things. We work across many countries with that research. Manufacturing is located in 13 countries, and we market our medicines across 120 countries. Now, We are in various therapeutic areas here. One of the main ones is diabetes. We've got a strong history in diabetes with, from the very first instances of diabetic work back in the 1920s. We were the first company to successfully produce insulin in collaboration with the University of Toronto. So a lot of history there that we're proud of. And I do see a few of my Lilly colleagues in the audience, so welcome, guys. Thanks for taking the time to come here. And again, as you talk about my career, one of the things, I'm not historically a safety professional. This is actually the first role I've had that I have responsibility directly for health and safety and environmental. My background is more in, as it's been said, operations, and while I have responsibility for safety in those areas, it's an area that I'm clearly delighted to be getting involved with. And I'd like to thank each of you for coming here today and investing in your personal development and learning. And I think it's important as you go through this. I know I'm speaking to a group of very passionate safety professionals who want to continue the journey to make sure nobody gets injured ever. Thank you for taking the time and investing your time in that. But as you go back to your workplace and you look at what are you doing with what you've learned, one of the things I want to implore on you that each employee at the companies you work with have to create their own safety mindset, their own safety journey. And something that I wanted to share here was back in 1987, I had my personal safety awakening where I left college, I went to work, and for the first few months, I'll be honest, I didn't remember or recall hearing anything about health and safety. I started work commissioning a facility that was a large biotechnology manufacturing plant, and they put me on shift. I was working the night shift, and I worked with a lot of operators in Liverpool, England. And as I was in one of those night shift breaks, I guess, I was in the break room, and we were having coffee, and I learned all about life from those operators who'd spent a lot of years on the plant. And I remember I used to smoke at the time, and I had a cigarette. And suddenly someone walked into the break room and said, "We've got a problem. We've got a major problem." So I walked out into the main production area, and coming down from the ceiling in this facility was a torrent of water. Water streaming through where the pipes were going through the floor. So we went up to the second floor, and sure enough, the floor was flooded. But the water was still coming down from upstairs. The place was just streaming with water. And so we went up to the top floor. And in the corner of the facility, there was a processed water vessel. It was a reinforced fiberglass vessel. I think it was about 15 to 20,000 liters. And in the corner, we could see the water was pumping out of this vent line. It was just churning up and water streaming everywhere. So one of the operators with me, a guy called Paul Brooks, said, "I'll go up and I'll shut the valve off." And what had happened was a control valve had clearly failed and was pouring water into this vessel, water streaming, as I say, out of the vent line. And he climbed up a ladder and stood on the top of this glass-reinforced fiberglass vessel. And as he did it, he reached across to a ball valve, and he said, "I think I'll shut the ball valve." And he closed the valve. And as he closed the valve, I heard cracking as the vessel started imploding. And he was on the top of this vessel. And I don't know if any of you have seen a vessel start imploding, but it sort of breathes a bit. And he's on the top of the vessel, sort of like a surfer. And he looked down and he said, "What should I do?" He didn't actually use those words, to be fair. He was a Liverpudlian. He's a Scouser. He screamed a bit. And I said, "Jump." What else were we going to say? He's up 30 foot in the air. All I could think of was jump. And he said, "Oh, no, I can't." So he went and I said, "Open the valve." So he opened up the ball valve and let the water back into that condition. The vessel stopped imploding, thankfully, and he came down. My heart was racing. And he was a calm, cool, collected operator. We've all seen them where, nothing wrong with that. And it turns out, as we investigated it, what had happened was the vent line had been submerged in water because another drain was blocked. Essentially, a large pump on the outlet of the vessel had drawn a vacuum because the vent line was actually blocked off, essentially, and created this partial vacuum in the vessel. And I tell that story with the knowledge that every one of us have had a safety moment. And at that point, I became, in my mind, a safety advocate, a safety professional, even though my job title might not have said safety professional. And I think it's that mindset about how do we engage all of the people in our organizations, that it's not just about the safety department's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. Now, moving forward, I wanted to share one more example here of an issue that occurred in one of my facilities. And on each of the pictures here, there we go. Each of the pictures, we have a bin. And on top of the bin is a powder transfer system, both pictures of the same piece of equipment. And at the end of a powder transfer operation, what operator 1 does is stands and undoes the clamp, you see on the right-hand side of the picture, undoes the clamp, and another operator uses a hoist to lift the unit off of the bin, and essentially creates that gap that you see in the picture on the right-hand side. So on this particular day, one of our operators give the signal to the other operator to lift the hoist. And what they did was they lifted it about 3 inches into the air, and the technique that had been developed over the years was to cup their hands around where that gap is to prevent any powder from falling out. It was just a mechanism to stop powder leaving. And on this particular occasion, the operator put his hands around and looked at the second operator to say, use the hoist to lift it up. So the second operator, instead of pushing the up button to lift the device off, pressed the down button. And the operator on this occasion his hand had actually gone into the line of fire, and it crushed his hand. He ended up with a fractured hand. Now, for incidents like this, and we classified this as a SIF potential, he could have had we believe, an amputation in certain conditions. But anyway, for this type of incident, we would do a full investigation. And as we went through the investigation, I had 3 levels of leadership who were coming in to review the situation. And each of those leaders were talking about, are we going to fire this operator? What are we going to do? It's clearly the operator shouldn't have put his hand in front of the unit. And I said, hold on. Which one of you guys has actually seen that operation? No, no, no. And as we look at the role and responsibility, I think frontline leadership's role in knowing what hazards our people are taking on is very important. This operator was trained to do the job that way. It wasn't proceduralized, as has been mentioned, but that was the technique that the operators had developed over the years that clearly put them at risk, and in this occasion did have some consequences. So it's a key thing for us as we look at leadership's role to make sure that we don't propagate those conditions. Now, back in the early 2000s, Lilly had a very well publicized issue with the Food and Drug Administration. We had some quality issues that required remediation, and it was quite an extensive event, very, very public, very painful learning for our quality organization. And I think there's some very clear links between quality, performance, and safety as we look at the concept of operational excellence. One of the things we recognized was over the years there'd been a lot of changes with various techniques our manufacturing sites had used to develop how they ran production areas. Indeed, a lot of plant managers were encouraged to be creative, encouraged to look at different ways of doing things. They were rewarded for being very creative. And what we did in the early or mid-2000s, I should say, is really start standing back and asking the question, how do we ensure that we never fall into the trap that we've seen in the last few years? And so back in the mid-2000s, as I say, we developed what we call the House of Manufacturing Operational Excellence, And this is what you see here, with our mission very clearly stated. We make medicine with safety first and quality always. I won't go into the full detail here, but you see the framework of outcomes, what are we trying to achieve on the left, and the principles by which we will achieve them. And so over the last several years, we've embarked on a journey to integrate all of these principles and outcomes into our manufacturing operations globally. So frankly, if you walk into any site around the world, you will see the same framework of operations, the same framework of governance, and the same demonstration of principles, ultimately with the goal of leading with safety first and quality always. Now at the base of the house, you see the foundation is the people. And we've spent a lot of time on this concept of the 4 C's. The 4 C's are the characteristics of the people we want to have in our company. And these are the types of characteristics that I've laid out here as we look at what we expect from leadership under those 4 C's. Capability, having the right understanding of the technical or external landscape. Curiosity, spending time on the floor, the expectation that our leaders really are out there understanding what are we asking our operations folks to do. The courage to stop work and really empower all of our teams to do the same. They have the authority absolutely without consequence to stop work if there's a concern, and the character ultimately to demand flawless execution, especially with regards to safety programs, etc. But our concept here is very simple, that safety leadership is the same characteristics that are needed to support operational excellence. Now, as we look at SIF and the introduction of SIF that we've been doing over the last few years, traditionally, I think, like most folks, we've been looking a lot at lagging indicators, and the recent emphasis being to look at some of the leading indicators as we look at how to monitor SIF events. And as we look at this, some of our production areas have different technologies or platforms, and we have those grouped into what we call networks. And the network reviews are really looking at how we can leverage leading indicators on those SIF potential events and how to prevent them. The last thing I'll say here is that a key part of this journey is not creating SIF as a separate program per se, but looking at how we integrate it into the culture overall to make sure that it's part of the fabric of what we do. So finally, in summary here, I'd like to offer my personal conclusion here, I guess. Leaders need to create their own personal value for safety, and I think as I look at this group's responsibilities, it's about being advocates for safety and obviously looking at all levels of leadership and helping them create that personal value for safety. I think we all have to tell our stories and help leverage those to help educate and bring our folks on. We've been talking a lot in Lilly recently about how do we accelerate the learning that many of us have taken many years of experience to gain. How do we leverage that and make it happen quicker? Safety leaders demonstrate the 4 C's, as I've mentioned, and how to blend the SIF prevention into company culture is another key part of our responsibilities. So thank you for your attention and time, and thanks for everything you do every day. So thank you. Thank you.
All right. We are going to have a quick conversation, and so we have time for questions. So if someone has a question, please approach the microphone and join us in our living room here as we begin a conversation based on some of the things we talked about. And I'm going to begin by asking a question that Laura and I began a conversation that didn't end, we had to walk out on stage. One of the things for me as a Canadian health and safety professional, there's a lot of things here we focus on for the larger company. And Laura asked a really good question that we didn't finish, and that was, when you focus on one thing, other things get lost sometimes. I mean, you're doing something at the expense of others. So I'm wondering, what do the three of you think about that? The idea that if I'm focusing on one, what gets lost as I'm focusing on SIF indicators?
I can,
Peter, please
attempt to answer that. It's a really good question. I should say I don't have the answer, by the way. I should say that. But I think because it's a very good question, and one of the things that we have to do is recognize that we have a complicated business that isn't just about safety. Obviously, that's a priority, or safe, but there's a whole other series of things that happen. And, one of the things we have to continue to do, my theme of leadership will continue here, that as we work with our leaders, it's helping them understand how do they move the agenda on multiple fronts without dropping the ball and making those priority decisions, so that we have signals, if you like, that something is being deteriorating, but making sure we re-energize people to focus always on the right things. So, as I say, it's a leadership journey here as we go through it.
Okay.
One thing I'd mention is that we have actually found that by working on the top of the pyramid, we are improving the bottom of the pyramid. Mm-hmm. So where we used to think we work on the bottom of the pyramid to work on the top, we have actually seen our best injury and illness performance ever. And so I think the employees appreciate when you narrow the priorities, and when you pick safety as the #1 priority, you get everything else. You get cost, you get quality, you get productivity,
right.
Because it's something we can unite on. We all want to work on nobody getting hurt and everybody going home safely. So it's a very uniting priority, and it works.
Okay, great. Don, anything to add?
I would just add that when you develop a focus on SIF, while you're doing that, it's very important to also recognize that you could unintentionally reallocate resources that are focused on non-SIF type of safety issues, like ergonomics or industrial hygiene or things like that. And it's really important to keep the focus on both, because you don't want to make the unintentional mistake of reallocating everything over to SIF. Now, having said that, there is a lot of data that is being collected and validated that proves exactly what Laura just said, and that is, if I focus on the triangle inside the triangle, or focus at the top, it will pay dividends in other areas of my safety performance. So there's a lot of data out there that says this new paradigm is emerging that says focusing on the SIF triangle inside the big triangle will also reduce your recordable injury rates. And we think the reason for that is because an SIF focus introduces higher degrees of rigor into a lot of your processes and procedures and behaviors, and that increase in rigor tends to transfer out into other places in your organization.
Great, thank you. So, gentleman at the microphone, please.
First off, thank you very much for those, all three of you, for those very thought-provoking and interesting presentations. I specifically had a question for you, Laura. When you were reviewing your ideas around the broken window, does Dow have engagement surveys that may have been an indicator to tell you which plants may have been quote-unquote bad neighborhoods? And if so, did they give any indication of that? If not, how did you determine which plants were in the bad neighborhoods?
Yeah, so first of all, we're still early in the journey, so we don't have a lot of data yet. We do engagement surveys, but they're annual, and so you can't really track a trend very well over the years. We did have an example of one leader that used an iPad at the door of the exit door to go to the parking lot, and it had the smiley face and the sad face, and as people walked out the door, they just hit how they felt that day. And he had a very good trend on morale on a very real-time basis and how that was affecting performance. But we haven't actually mastered that, so if you have some ideas, let's talk. But it's definitely a leading indicator. We just haven't figured out how to measure it very close to the work.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Please go ahead.
Hello. My question, first of all, I wanted to also thank all three of you, and specifically, Laura, I really appreciated how you talked about the conditions as well as the individual. And as you work on SIF, there's a lot more focus on human error. How do we make sure that as we focus on that, that we keep that connectivity, that it doesn't become blame the operator?
Well, I'll say what we are starting to do is reinforce positively those folks that actually fixed something that was a severe. So just yesterday, I sent a recognition on an incident where an operator was having to get a ladder within 6 feet of the rail to open a valve on top of a vessel, and the plant moved the valve down to floor level. I mean, this is simple, right? This is so simple. And it eliminated the potential severity of falling over the handrail. And so as we've started focusing on this potential and the environment, people are fixing things, and that's really what we want. We want, engineering controls in to eliminate the hazard in the first place, hierarchy of controls. So it's a big agenda, right? And we have to fix all of these. We're just so early in the journey. There's much left to be done.
I think you make a good point on that as well, that when you set up a healthy climate in your workplace where workers feel safe and secure in reporting near misses, and they feel safe and secure when they exercise pause work or stop work authority, and they're supported when they do that, it tends to create this really neat climate where people feel comfortable and safe reporting things, and they have great ideas. They're faced with these exposures every day, and they've thought about the solutions to these, and all they're looking for is a voice in order to get these issues corrected from an engineering standpoint.
Yeah, and we to add to that, I mean, using mechanisms to help ease of reporting as well. In the past, we've had some systems that were much too bureaucratic, I'd say, to get information flowing, but finding a way to get the people who are on the shop floor able to raise their concerns, identify areas for error reduction quickly, and then see things getting done and prioritized, and reinforcing that with positive recognition as well. A few years ago, when the price of gas was a bit higher, we had this mechanism for recognition that rewarded some of our employees with gas cards, I guess. I didn't know how popular those gas cards would be. People love gas cards, and so it created the environment where people were sharing ideas and being able to fix things. Now, and again, I often worry sometimes that while engineering fixes can be progressed, sometimes, and obvious in many cases, I think, and someone mentioned it earlier, I can't remember exactly when, but this concept that we need are people checking in every day and thinking about how they're operating, not being distracted, not being complacent, but focused on the tasks they require are some of the critical things I think that are important going forward.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman on my right, please.
Good afternoon, and I also thank you, because every time we hear messages from our CEO, it just really stands out in your head. So you being leaders up here, giving these messages, it's really helpful. My question is, we've all been on this journey of the triangle with inside the triangle. I mean, this was like 2009 data that we looked at in 2010, 2011 to formulate these ideas that we're working on today. I completely agree and see that, every time there's one SIF precursor that is identified, and then measures are taken to eliminate it, and that is passed on throughout, our industry, it's a win, right? That's many people that didn't have to go through the hit. My only question is, we're not really seeing that trend that we started this journey on change very much in the last 5 to 6 years. And are we hoping that continuing on this path as we're doing it today is going to get us to that goal, or are we looking at other things within that to keep working on the trend that we really started this process for?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great comment, because like I said, when we first started our Save a Life campaign and then immediately had 4 fatalities, people were questioning, are we on the right path? Is this the right strategy? I mean, how did this happen? We thought as soon as we'd start counting life events that fatalities would go away. And I had to keep telling them, stay the course, stay the course, stay the course. We're doing the right thing. And, you know, you're right. It takes a while to change, you know, the big ship to come around. But I personally think we're on the right course. I think we will see improvements. But I'll tell you that we had another severe incident this year where a employee was riding a aerial lift and was crushed between the aerial lift and the I-beam and had serious head injury. And when we looked at JLGs and scissor lifts and other aerial lifts, there is no crush protection in the industry to prevent crushing. Why did we have to wait for how many incidents to happen before we insisted on crush protection? Well, I'll tell you what, we implemented no aerial lifts without crush protection starting today. And we upset the entire world. Oh my God, how am I going to get my work done? And we made leaders go out and do safe work permits of every aerial lift. And it's just caused a calamity of work happening. But I'll tell you what, we have vendors lining up trying to get us crush protection on our aerial lifts. And so we just haven't taken it seriously enough. I mean, we have to draw a line in the sand. We have to say no more. That is not going to happen. And then once you say no more, everybody agrees and goes in line with it. And so if all of us said no more to one thing, we would change this industry big time.
Yeah, and there's still a long way to go. Right?
There's a long way to go.
And you know, and you hit right on the key point that when a senior executive from your company meets with a senior executive from the aerial work platform organization and they start to see eye to eye on these types of issues, great things can happen. But not nearly enough of that happens today.
Yeah.
And we have to be in a position to encourage all of our executives to meet with executives from support organizations and contractor organizations to help influence their approach to safety as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sir, please go ahead.
Yes. You wouldn't in your studies have seen a study, because I haven't, relative to the difference in automobile accidents, because it is the leading cause of fatalities in the workplace. And relative to vehicles which meet the DOT requirements relative to CDL, which in general forces management to at least put some bare bone controls in place, where with small fleet, passenger cars, etc., there's nothing that mandates or pushes that management to follow any basic procedures. So I'm a believer that, because I see a lot of small fleet, they're hidden. They never think about that driver that's a small fleet. Mm-hmm. They don't do record reviews. They don't do training. They don't do the maintenance that's required. So I'm wondering if you've ever seen studies where there's regulatory mandates against where there's no mandatory mandate.
I personally have not seen studies of that nature. They might be out there, but I'm not familiar with them. But to your point, one of the things that we need to be thinking about for preventing motor vehicle related fatalities is organizations and executives can't wait for regulations and standards to be introduced to save the day. Mm-hmm. They have to go way beyond what the minimum regulatory standards are. And one good starting place is a new ANSI standard that just came out on motor vehicle standards. But they have to go way beyond what the law requires and start addressing driver safety from a completely different perspective. Don't wait for the regulators to tell you what to do. Get way ahead of that curve.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Regulations in this space are going to take some time, I think, to come through. And, you know, one of the things we've been looking at is how do we put in place leading indicators here around motor vehicle safety. And one example is, are we really training our drivers in behind the wheel practical training within a certain amount of time? And we've actually set in place that global expectation that all people will have assessed driving tests, if you like, to show are capable of meeting certain requirements. In addition, we've looked at a leading indicator around supervision, leaders, monitoring people while they're driving and providing direct feedback around the driving technique. So there's a few things there that we tried to do. Now, frankly, we haven't put in place a complete cell phone ban. Many companies have, and I think that's an area we're looking at. We've put in place cell control in the US so that our drivers can use hands-free, but not take calls or text or access internet or whatever while they're driving. And, you know, I'm looking at the sign of the National Safety Council right in front of me. I know Dave Tita is a guy who works in the National Safety Council who has some very powerful stories and information about driver safety. So if you make a note of that name, Dave Tita, part of the NSC, who is a very strong resource in this area.
Great. Thank you. Sir, on the right-hand side, please.
Thank you. This question is for Don. You talked about neurology and behavioral sciences and how it can have some great impact in safety. Could you be more specific on how you've been able to make this practical?
Sure. So very quickly, when you look at the human brain and you study neuroscience, you can boil it down to fast brain, slow brain. Slow brain involves logical decision-making processes. Fast brain is super fast, and it's a way for us to be more efficient. The problem is that when you're in an exposure situation and you have to make decisions about what to do next. And we love to believe that those decisions are being made over here in the slow brain where there's a lot of thought and logic and calculus being done. But the reality is those decisions are being made over here in the fast brain. So that's one practical thing that we have to be thinking about, understanding how can you transfer some of those fast brain decision modes back over here to slow brain thinking so you can make smarter and better decisions. And then the other area is around bias. So there's a lot of cognitive biases that influence our thinking and our decision making, and spending time to understand where those biases can enter into our decision making.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Okay. Thank you, Don. Sir?
Yes, thanks to the panelists. Great discussion. You've all talked about the potential outcome being very important here, identifying the triangle within the triangle. So I have kind of a two-part question for you. How do you get a rigorous process internally so that a safety team in the U.S. and a safety team from South America and a safety team from Asia Pacific look at a detailed event and give it the same potential outcome rating, number one? And number two, is it time for us to look across industries to begin to standardize that process so that we can begin to share data, not just internally, but across industries?
I will say two things on that. One is we're about 2 years into measuring potential. We have guidelines, so you can kind of read the guidelines and follow along to understand. But we did not scrutinize anybody reporting. So if they wanted to report and they said it was potential, we said, fine, take it. And as the organization learns more and more about potential, they become better themselves at understanding which ones fit and which ones don't. And so we had a big spike in our P-Life reporting, and then it's come kind of down into a normal level. And so we're looking at the ones that are actually reported and going, oh yeah, that holy smokes, that was some potential, right? So I would encourage you not to discourage reporting, first of all. On the second question on the industry, I mean, remember that one of the great benefits of P-Life reporting is that the individual themselves understands the potential. Not that we can put a big database together and find out what's the biggest potential. I'll tell you what they are. It's falling, and it's interactions with heavy moving equipment or moving equipment. If we could solve those two things, we would probably eliminate. So it's really, I don't know that we're going to gain so much from the data. I mean, our data guy would probably argue with me, but I'm out, go fix falls, go fix interactions with heavy equipment, and you'll save a lot of lives.
Just a couple of comments, too. First of all, it's very important to develop what we're going to call, calibrated decision logic, so that when any person on a team of 10 looks at a case, they have some calibrated logic to go through to determine whether it has SIF potential or not. We find that to be very helpful, and it's transferable around the world. But it takes time to develop that, and so you've got to study a lot of cases, and you have to get people together to agree on the decision logic. On the sharing of data, it's a really good topic for an even deeper conversation, because what we find, we work in a lot of different industry sectors, so we can find something in common, like working at heights is a really big issue. But the problem is that working in heights in the utility sector is different from working at heights in a manufacturing plant. And it's different from working at heights in a construction environment. And so while the bottom line exposure is the same, the methodology of the exposure or the situation that the person is in is different from sector to sector to sector, and there are different controls to put in place. But big picture, it makes a lot of sense. It's a little bit harder when you start getting into particular industry sectors.
There's a good reminder there, I think, to when you fill out your comment cards at the end of this session in a couple of minutes, to think about those topics where you'd like to see discussion further. Sir, you have the last question today.
Listen, I wanted to appreciate both Dow and Lily with going after leading indicators instead of going after lagging indicators. We're too much in this industry. We look at the trends of lagging and the accidents that happen and those trends from that, and then we go after it. It's a much more proactive approach to go after leading indicators, looking at the at-risk behaviors before they occur, and not to go after the worker, to go after the system failures that are occurring. So I want to congratulate you for being, to me, ahead of the industry, because I'd like to see my industry, which is the utility industry, go after that same approach. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, on that note, we're going to end our session. I want to thank our guests, all three. It was a privilege to hear as a health and safety professional, to hear the balance of qualitative, quantitative, leading, lagging. It's very encouraging to know, and we are dealing with the same issues in Canada, of course. So if you can join me in just a round of applause for our guests. Thank you. And remember to fill out your comment cards and enjoy the rest of these sessions today. Thank you. Great job.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this Campbell Institute webinar today. A recording of the webinar will be made available within the next few days. Anyone who registered will receive a link to the recording in their inbox, so please keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in learning more from speakers in this setting, I encourage you to join us at this year's NSC Congress and Expo in Houston, Texas. You will hear from EHS professionals at IBM, United Rentals, and Cummins, Inc. on the topic of Industry 4.0. We have 3 events on this leading edge topic. The Executive Forum will kick it off and takes place directly after opening session. You can then continue the conversation at 2 different 3-hour workshops. These do require pre-registration, so I encourage you to move fast as these spaces are taken up quickly. You can find all this information on our website, www.thecampbellinstitute.com/NSC-Congress-Expo. Last but not least, I want to inform you about Safe and Sound Week, taking place this week from August 13th through the 19th. The Campbell Institute and NSC are both proud partners of this OSHA campaign. Organizations are encouraged to show their commitment to safety through various events and activities. You can also find helpful resources at www.osha.gov/Safe and Sound Week. I want to thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Magali. And we want to thank everyone else for joining us for this webinar. We appreciate your attention and participation in today's event. You may now disconnect.